and that is that some of the items, I believe about 6 of them, are getting reworked slightly. Now, this rework is actually to kind of get us ready for the next set. There are some things coming in the next set that we want to get the item system sort of in a better spot for. But overall, like I said, hopefully the impact of these isn't that big. So let's talk, for example, Guardbreaker is going to become Striker's Flail. And overall, same stats, although no AP anymore. So this will help it be a little bit more of a universal item. It's got attack speed, crit, damage, amp, and health. And then every time you critically strike, whether it be an auto attack or a spell, you'll gain 5% damage amp, stacking up to 4 times. So the maximum here is actually a little bit more damage amp than it was before as well. But overall, this should make it a little less, I have to hope they cast a shield, and I have to hope they AoE and proc that shield. And now it can just be good damage amp if you build crit, should pair really well with IE, Jeweled Gauntlet, Executioner, stuff like that. So again, you'll build it in a lot of the exact same places you were before. Should barely notice the change. Should be a little bit better on AD champions. Good stuff. Guinsoo's. This is the biggest change, if you will. I already put out a video on this that kind of shows the difference before and after. But overall, you should feel pretty comfortable still building Guinsoo's like you did before. The only difference now is it's not going to hyper synergize with people who already have really high attack speed or proc on attack, things like Zeri or Jinx or Vayne. And it should be a little bit better on people who like have to stop and cast their spell or have a lower base attack speed. So like Senna benefits, Aphelios benefits, even Jinx to some extent. And so my expectation is for Guinsoo's is that actually we'll see it built a little bit more, but usually only 1 and not 2. But take a look and let us know what you think. Next up is Spirit Visage. This is replacing Redemption. Redemption was a weird supporty item that actually healed both the wearer and the people around it. And again, we're trying to make our core item system mostly selfish stuff. So the big buff here is that Redemption didn't give you any durability for the first 5 seconds until it procced once. Now you just get that 10% durability up front. So that's going to last the same. And then you're going to regenerate health every second rather than every 5 seconds, which means you'll actually not miss out on value, which is usually a good thing. And it also gains a little bit of health. Overall, it's a tiny nerf to the item because, again, you're not getting that AoE heal. But selfishly, it should be a small bit better. This is one that my shot call is it'll be a tiny, like, neutral. It's not going to, like, wow anybody. But overall, it's what we want it to be. And if we have to buff it, we will. But, yeah, this should be good on people like Cho'Gath, 3-star Braum, etc. All right, Kraken's Fury. This is probably the biggest change of all the items as far as like completely different function. Like this one is a very different function. Hurricane was all about having really high base AD and then shooting extra bolts off that kind of just fed people mana or really didn't kill anyone. And so that's completely gone. Now the item is actually about gaining stacking AD. So it's kind of like the Archangels of AD, except instead of over time, it's on auto attack, which does synergize with doing lots of auto attacks. So there's one really good user this set, which is Zeri. Zeri should be pretty good with this item, especially over time. But overall, actually, a lot of the users you would expect to be good in this set, people like Vayne or Aphelios, already have a bunch of AD from their traits. So like Marksman gives AD, Slayer gives AD. Kog'Maw is another one that can use this kind of well. But overall, I actually expect this to be kind of built a little low. Now, I know when Dishsoap looked at these, he thought this was very, very strong. So we'll see if that ends up being correct. But overall, this is, again, an item that's meant to be sort of a stacking, over time so that by the end of the fight, you're doing a lot of damage. Zeri kind of being the big user of this. All right, Void Staff. This is Static Shiv was this really weird item that like you kind of felt bad putting on your main carry. It always felt like you knew you were missing out on damage, but you always needed it. And it had this whole like do extra 30 damage that had this really cool fantasy of like, if I have a lot of attack speed, I can do Pikachu builds. But we've had to move away from that. And so we'll talk about Shiv a little later. But we wanted to get Void Staff to be an item that can provide that shred while also not feeling like crap to put on your main carry. And so overall, it's very similar. It's got some more AP, so you lose the proc, and then it shreds. So pretty simple here. My expectation is that you still won't see this on a lot of main carries. It's almost going to get played exactly the same as before, right? Like if you're playing a brand comp, Ziggs will have this. That'll be pretty common. But you're not going to see a lot of, main carries with it, but it won't feel bad if you have to, right? And so if you end up with like a brand that has Shojin, JG, and this, it's going to be okay, and so that's kind of the idea here. Lastly is Sterak's Gage. This one got a very slight change. When it procced before, you would get like some health and AD. And we took a look at this item, and if you saw the preview actually had it with Omnivamp, but we've taken that out because we found with the Omnivamp it just became a little too similar to Bloodthirster. So when we looked at Sterak's Gage and Bloodthirster, what we decided is that Bloodthirster is the slightly more defensive option where you can like heal infinitely, but it'll give you less offensive power. Sterak's Gage is the like, I've already got the healing covered somewhere else. I want lots of offensive power, but still survivability. So 40 base AD, which is really good for a melee champion. So this is going to be good on someone like a melee Renekton, for example. And then 300 health. And then at 60% health, you're going to get a giant shield that's essentially going to keep you alive for a good amount of time. It will decay over 6 seconds, but it's a bigger shield than Bloodthirster. And so again, you're not going to get the Omnivamp, but you're going to get more offensive power and more survivability. So if you've got like a melee glass cannon, maybe someone like a Graves after he gets some buffs, could be good in this set. But this should be a melee item that should help in the future and have a little bit clearer role than it did in the past. Now with these changes, we also added some new artifacts. First off is because Spirit Visage is now a core item, we removed Anima Visage from the artifact system. But we did feel like we wanted to replace it with a new tank item. And so now we have the Indomitable. Now, if you remember from the anomaly in the previous set, there was that really cool one where you didn't move and you could pull people towards them. This is similar. You get 400 health, 20 armor and MR, and then you also gain 10% max health on top of that. So a lot of health, stun immunity, so you can't be stunned, very good. And then you always pull your current target into melee range, which is neat. Now, the anomaly locked you in place and created some pretty silly shenanigans where you would just put them in the back line. We did kind of want to remove a little bit of those, I'll call them Leduc shenanigans. And so the character can still move just very slowly. So there you go. It's pretty fun though. I think it's going to be pretty powerful. All right, Flicker Blade. If you're somebody who's like, no, I get the Guinsoo's thing. I get your logic, but like the old Guinsoo's was where it was at. Flicker Blade is the old Guinsoo's essentially, except even more powerful. It starts with 15% attack speed instead of 10. Guinsoo's used to give 5 attack speed per auto. This gives 8, so it will ramp up even quicker. And every 5 attacks also grant 4 AD and 5 AP. So this thing can ramp up. If you have a ramping fantasy, this is your item. I think this is going to be one that you're going to pick on 2-1 if you see it, and you're going to know what you're building and have some pretty powerful highs, even higher than the old Guinsoo's before. Should be fun. All right, Static Shiv. Static Shiv, as I mentioned, back in the day, you had this really cool fantasy, right? Pikachu Zaya builds in set 3, where if you had a bunch of attack speed, you could like shock down the entire enemy team, and it was kind of fun. But because we kept moving away from that to make it a more flexible item, we lost that. We lost that spark. And as I've said before, artifacts are where we're supposed to have these sharp, unique fantasies. And so Pikachu Shiv is back. This item is focused entirely on if you have a lot of attack speed, you're going to do a lot of damage. And so every third attack, we'll deal 30 plus 40% of the holder's bonus ability power as additional damage. And so if you build like this plus Guinsoo's, which has some AP, on something like a set 13 Kog'Maw, for example, this thing's going to be sparking and it's going to be hitting pretty hard. This set, I think Twisted Fate is going to be the best user of this. You know, Guinsoo's Static Shiv, Twisted Fate can do some silly stuff. But yeah, should be pretty cool. And then lastly is Titanic Hydra. Don't let this item fool you. This one's tricky and a lot of people didn't quite see this right. This item says 300 health, 15 AD, 15 attack speed. So it's definitely an offensive item on someone like Renekton, for example. Pretty obvious. Attacks deal 3% of the holder's max health plus 8% of their AD as bonus physical damage to the target and adjacent enemies. Now, when a lot of people see this item, they're like, ooh, big health people, right? Like, I'm going to put this on my Dr. Mundos or your Cho'Gaths. That's true. But the thing to remember is there's a certain class of champion that has very high AD and high health. 3-star range champions. The biggest one here is Senna. This item is amazing on Senna. 3-star Vayne also can do some pretty insane stuff with this, with Slayer going. but because it's getting percentage of their AD, not just their health, and 3-star units generally have very high health pools, you can do some cool stuff with this. So be on the lookout for that. But like I said, this item cleaves pretty hard and can do a lot of damage. When I first ran sims with this, with the numbers that they gave me that are in that article, and I saw it put it on Senna, it was like, oh, nearly. So let us know what you think. But yeah,